A Black Dad's Park day with his 7-year-old son turns into a nightmare when a white woman accuses him of kidnapping and cops handcuff him in front of his child. With a fierce lawyer, he sues and uncovers her shocking past. Years of racist false 911 calls and embezzling money from a children's charity. But the darkest twist? That stolen cash covered up a hit-and-run that killed his brother 16 years ago, a crash she fled from. And the final blow, her own son was adopted. His real father? The very brother she helped kill. The woman who tried to ruin his life was secretly raising his nephew all along. It was a warm summer afternoon, and the sun beamed down on the lush green park that surrounded Mr. Lucian Mancini's family. He had taken his 7-year-old son, Max, for a leisurely walk in search of adventure while he listened to his favorite audiobook about ancient civilizations. As they strolled through the trees, Max couldn't help but feel grateful to have such a loving and supportive father. Suddenly, as they reached a secluded area by a pond with a small waterfall cascading into it, Mr. Lucian Mancini heard a sudden scream from behind him. He turned around to see his own daughter, Emily, frantically searching for her younger brother, Jake. She was in tears, surrounded by the wreckage of their car and its overturned engine. Mr. Lucian Mancini's heart raced as he realized what had happened. Jake had fallen into the water while playing with his friends in the pond, but when they reached out to try to pull him back, the current swept him away. Emily frantically tried to grab onto a nearby tree branch, but it was no use against the powerful current. Determined not to let this happen again, Mr. Lucian Mancini quickly called 911 and explained their situation. He told them that Jake had fallen into the water while playing with his friends in the pond, but when they reached out to try to pull him back, the current swept him away. Emily frantically tried to grab onto a nearby tree branch, but it was no use against the powerful current. As the police arrived on scene, Mr. Lucian Mancini took the lead and explained their story while coordinating with emergency services. The officers quickly assessed Jake's condition and rushed him to nearby hospitals for immediate medical attention. Meanwhile, Mr. Lucian Mancini tried to calm Emily down by explaining how brave she had been in attempting to rescue her brother. Just as they were about to leave, a white woman approached them at the scene of the accident. She was dressed in all black, carrying a police badge and wearing sunglasses that obscured her eyes. Her demeanor appeared stern but compassionate, with a hint of anger etched on her face. "I'm Detective Sarah," she introduced herself. "Can you identify your son?" Mr. Lucian Mancini hesitated for a moment before blurting out the name, Jake, as he tried to recall his own identity. The detective's expression quickly hardened as she listened intently to their story. Detective Sarah continued, "According to our investigation, Jake was last seen playing in the water with some of your friends at around 4 p.m. this afternoon." She gestured towards Emily, who had just been released from the hospital and was now standing next to him, sobbing uncontrollably. Detective Sarah's eyes narrowed as she processed what she had heard. "What do you know about Jake's parents?" asked Detective Sarah in a matter-of-fact tone. "Have they ever made any statements or provided evidence against your son?" Mr. Lucian Mancini shook his head fiercely, struggling to maintain composure. "No," he replied firmly. "He was my only child, and I loved him more than anything else." Detective Sarah's expression softened slightly as she listened intently to Mr. Lucian Mancini's explanation of their complicated past. He had lost his older brother in a car accident years ago, which left them all with the responsibility of raising Jake alone. "I see," Detective Sarah replied eventually. "Can you provide any additional information or evidence that may help us determine your son's whereabouts and potential involvement?" Mr. Lucian Mancini nodded in agreement. "There were some inconsistencies between my account of events and what I had heard from witnesses, but I still believe he was missing. Detective Sarah studied Mr. Lucian Mancini for a moment before speaking more directly. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "You have nothing to fear," she assured him firmly. "We're working close, with the Bureau and local law enforcement agencies to piece together your son's life events and determine what may be responsible for his disappearance." Mr. Lucian Mancini felt a wave of relief wash over him as Detective Sarah took charge, emphasizing their collaborative approach in solving this case. As they walked away from the park, Mr. Lucian Mancini couldn't help but wonder if he would ever find out exactly who had taken Jake from him. The scene closed on Max, his eyes still wide with shock and confusion after discovering that his father had been kidnapped by a white woman years ago. The sound of police sirens blared through the air as they raced towards Mr. Lucian Mancini's home, leaving behind a trail of destruction in their wake. Detective Sarah entered the house at once, her badge clinking on the metal doorknob as she took the lead into the living room. She scanned the room with a critical eye, checking for any signs of Jake or his parents' belongings. Suddenly, Detective Sarah's attention was drawn to an old photo album lying on a nearby table. As she opened it up, she noticed a faded photograph of her own family taken years ago in front of their home in another city. The photo had been lost over the years due to sentimental reasons and now lay forgotten in this park. Detective Sarah said, holding out the album for inspection. "Have you ever seen that picture?" Mr. Lucian Mancini's eyes widened as he recognized his own sister in the photograph, a young woman with curly Sophia Corey hair and piercing blue eyes who looked strikingly similar to Emily. He had always loved her since childhood, but this realization only added weight to the gravity of their complicated past. "What do you mean?" asked Detective Sarah, scrutinizing the photo again. "You have a sister? And it's not just that we look alike. There are other similarities, too." Mr. Lucian Mancini nodded, confirming her suspicion. "Yes, I had an older brother named Jake who was adopted when my mother remarried after our father died. We were never given any information about him or his family and didn't know much about them before he passed away." Detective Sarah's expression darkened as she realized the full extent of the truth behind Mr. Lucian Mancini's story. The photo album had been purchased by Emily years ago, with a handwritten note on its cover explaining that it contained memories from her childhood spent in another city. "Emily," Detective Sarah said, placing her hand on the old photograph. "What do you know about your mother and Jake?" Emily looked up at Mr. Lucian Mancini, tears streaming down her face. "My mom was my best friend growing up. She had a secret love affair with Jake when he was still in high school, but she didn't want to tell me anything because I knew we were from different families." Detective Sarah's eyes widened as Emily explained the heart-wrenching betrayal that had left Mr. Lucian Mancini feeling abandoned and betrayed by his own family. The photo album had served as a reminder of their complicated past, with Jake being adopted years ago while he was still in high school. "I understand," Detective Sarah said, her voice softening as she continued. "We're going to investigate the circumstances surrounding your son's disappearance and determine if there is any information that may shed light on his family background." With a heavy heart, Mr. Lucian Mancini nodded, grateful for Detective Sarah's support in piecing together his past and finding out who had taken Jake from him. The scene closed with Detective Sarah leaving the house, leaving behind her partner in crime as they continued to comb through Jake's belongings, searching for any clues or evidence that may help them solve this case. The memory of Emily's family and Jake's secret love affair hung heavy over their shoulders, casting a dark shadow on Mr. Lucian Mancini's life. The Detective Sarah's heart sank as she walked towards Mr. Lucian Mancini's house, her partner in crime, Detective David, standing beside her, keeping an eye out for any potential threats or clues that may lead them to the truth about Jake's disappearance. The scene was tense and quiet, with only a few snippets of conversation bouncing in between their voices as they searched through Mr. Lucian Mancini's living room. Mr. Mancini sat on his front porch, gazing out at the park where he had spent countless hours with his son. As Detective Sarah entered, he turned to face her, his express ion filled with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. "Detective," he said, his voice shaking slightly as he met her gaze. "I've never thought that this would happen to my family." Mrs. Mancini nodded in agreement, tears streaming down her face. She had always been proud of Jake's strong fatherly bond with him, but the betrayal was too much for her to bear. "I know," she said softly, "but we need you on this case now more than ever. We can't afford to let Jake go without a chance at justice." Detective Sarah nodded again. Determination etched onto her face as she walked through Mr. Mancini's house, scanning his belongings for any signs of evidence or clues that could lead them closer to the truth. The first stop was on Jake's room, where he had stored his camera and phone. The detective opened the phone case and examined the photos, searching for anything out of the ordinary or suspicious about Mr. Mancini's family history. As she studied the images, Detective Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. "Detective," she said softly, "you don't have to look at this." Mr. Mancini sighed heavily, his eyes filled with regret and anger as he spoke through clenched teeth. "Jake's been seeing someone else since we last saw him," he whispered. "Someone who has a lot of money and power, someone who will do anything to protect Jake from the consequences of our family secrets." Detective Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what Mr. Mancini was saying. The detective knew that Jake had always been an open-minded young man with no secret life or enemies. But now, everything seemed off. The next stop was on Jake's computer, where he had recorded a series of messages and videos discussing their family history and the betrayal that had left him feeling abandoned. Detective Sarah examined the files, looking for any clues or evidence that could shed light on Mr. Mancini's motives or plan to frame someone else for his son's disappearance. As she continued her search, Detective Sarah couldn't shake off a sense of unease and suspicion. The more she dug into Jake's phone messages, the more convinced she was that he had been manipulated by some powerful force or individual with their own agenda. "Detective," Mrs. Mancini said softly, "this is starting to get ridiculous." Detective Sarah nodded in agreement as they continued through Mr. Mancini's house, searching for any clues or evidence that could help them solve this case and bring Jake back home safely. As they searched the bedrooms, Detective Sarah discovered a secret room behind a bookshelf filled with mysterious items such as old letters, newspaper clippings, and photographs. The detective couldn't shake off an eerie feeling of foreboding whenever she looked into those eyes that seemed to follow her every move. "What's in there?" Detective David asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Mrs. Mancini," Detective Sarah replied firmly. "It contains a map of the city and several locations where Jake has been seen over the past few weeks." Detective David nodded slowly as he looked at the maps, feeling a growing sense of fear for Mr. Mancini's safety. The detective knew that if they were to find out who was behind the mysterious disappearances, they would have to take action fast. With renewed determination, Detective Sarah and Detective David left Mr. Mancini's house and headed towards the park where Jake had last been seen. As they walked through the streets, they encountered various suspicious characters who seemed eager to keep them on their toes. The detective could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she followed the trail of clues leading her closer to the mysterious figure behind Jake's disappearances. The atmosphere was tense and eerie as they navigated through narrow alleyways and alleys lined with abandoned buildings, each one holding its own secrets and dark histories. As they approached a nearby park, Detective Sarah's heart raced even faster when she saw Jake walking towards them from the distance. He looked up at her with his eyes narrowed and a hint of anger etched on his face as he caught sight of her. "Jake," he whispered urgently, "I need you back." Detective Sarah took in Jake's words, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She knew that they had found the person responsible for taking Jake away from them, but she also felt a sense of uncertainty about what this new individual's plan was to keep him hidden and protect their secrets. As they approached the park where Jake had last been seen, Detective Sarah noticed something strange happening around Jake. The other kids were running wild in the nearby playground, laughing and playing with no regard for safety or warning signs. It seemed like someone had taken control of the situation and was using it as a cover-up to keep Jake hidden from his family. Detective Sarah quickly made her way towards Jake, determined not to let him fall victim to the mysterious figure's plan once again. As she approached the playground, Detective David joined in, their eyes fixed on the other kids who were laughing and running around with reckless abandon. "Hey," Detective Sarah called out, her voice shaking slightly as she reached for Jake. "Can you help us find some of those kids?" Jake looked up at her, his expression filled with confusion. "What are you talking about? I haven't seen any children in the park." Detective Sarah's heart sank as they realized that the mysterious figure had taken control of the playground and was using it to hide Jake from their investigation. "Stay back," Detective David said, pointing a finger at one of the kids who had run into danger. "We need you out of there before he gets hurt or worse." Detective Sarah nodded in agreement as she followed Detective David towards the other children, her mind racing with questions and concerns about what was happening to Jake and why this mysterious figure was so determined to keep him hidden. As they approached the playground, Detective Sarah noticed something strange happening around the kids. The playground had been transformed into a makeshift prison, with metal bars surrounding each area and razor wire walls separating them from one another. It seemed like someone had taken control of the space and was using it as a place for experimentation or punishment. Detective Sarah's heart raced even faster when she saw Jake standing in front of the barbed wire fence, looking up at her with a mixture of fear and anger etched on his face. He knew that he was being held captive, unable to escape or communicate with anyone outside the park. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake whispered urgently. "I haven't seen any children in this playground." Detective Sarah's mind raced as she realized that the mysterious figure had taken control of the playground and was using it as a place for experimentation or punishment. The kids were being used as test subjects, their voices recorded and analyzed to find out if they could be trusted. "Stay back," Detective David said again, pointing a finger at one of the children who had run into danger. "We need you out of there before he gets hurt or worse." Detective Sarah nodded in agreement as she followed Detective David towards the other children, her mind racing with questions and concerns about what was happening to Jake and why this mysterious figure was so determined to keep him hidden. As they approached the playground, Detective Sarah noticed something strange happening around the kids. The playground had been transformed into a makeshift prison, with metal bars surrounding each area and razor wire walls separating them from one another. It seemed like someone had taken control of the space and was using it as a place for experimentation or punishment. Detective Sarah's heart raced even faster when she saw Jake standing in front of the barbed wire fence, looking up at her with a mixture of fear and anger etched on his face. He knew that he was being held captive, unable to escape or communicate with anyone outside the park. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake whispered urgently. "I haven't seen any children in this playground." Detective Sarah's mind raced as she realized that the mysterious figure had taken control of the playground and was using it as a place for experimentation or punishment. The kids were being used as test subjects, their voices recorded and analyzed to find out if they could be trusted. "Stay back," Detective David said again, pointing a finger at one of the children who had run into danger. "We need you out of there before he gets hurt or worse." Detective Sarah nodded in agreement as she followed Detective David towards the other children, her mind racing with questions and concerns about what was happening to Jake and why this mysterious figure was. Detective Sarah's heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and fear as she approached the barbed wire fence that separated Jake from his 7-year-old son, James. The child was standing nervously at one end, looking up at her through tearful eyes. Detective David stood next to him, watching intently as their father struggled against the force holding him captive. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake whispered, struggling for breath under his restraints. "I haven't seen any children in this playground." Sarah knew that he was being held captive, but her heart raced even faster when she saw Jake's fear etched on his face. She had been hired by the local authorities to investigate a series of kidnappings and forced disappearances involving young children across town, all with their voices recorded and analyzed for potential evidence. Sarah's mind raced as she realized that the mysterious figure who claimed responsibility for the kidnappings was using the playground as a testing ground for his experiments or punishment. The kids were being used as test subjects in his twisted experiments, their voices recorded and analyzed to see if they could be trusted. "Stay back," Detective David said again, pointing at one of the children who had run into danger. "We need you out of there before he gets hurt or worse." Sarah nodded in agreement as she followed Detective David towards the other children, her heart pounding with questions and concerns about what was happening to Jake and why this mysterious figure was. Sarah's instincts told her that something was off. She couldn't shake the feeling that the kidnapper had somehow gained access to their personal information or surveillance devices, monitoring every move they made in the park. She approached Jake cautiously, hoping he would be okay with her presence. "Jake," she said softly, trying not to sound too anxious. "Are you all right?" He looked up at her with a mixture of fear and anger, his eyes filled with tears and confusion. "I'm fine," he replied weakly, "but I don't know what's going on." Sarah knew that there was more than just the kid in question who was being held captive. It seemed like this kidnapper had a deep-rooted connection to the local community, using his experiments as a means of controlling and manipulating people. She turned her attention back towards Jake, trying to figure out how he got into such trouble. "Who are you?" she asked, feeling more determined than ever to solve this case. "I'm just a dad," Jake replied, his voice trembling with fear. "I was playing with my son in the park when I overheard some kids talking about something suspicious." Sarah's mind raced as she remembered what they had heard, that there were secret experiments taking place at the local school and that one of them involved kidnapping children. "You're not sure if these kids are real," Detective David said, his voice cold and unwavering. "There might be others like you who have been caught up in this twisted game." Sarah's heart sank as she realized just how far-reaching this investigation was. The kidnappers seemed to know every detail about her life, from the playground where Jake had been held captive to the local school where he could potentially meet his next victim. She knew that they would need to work together to solve the case and bring the kidnappers to justice. But she also couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by someone who seemed determined to keep their secrets hidden. She turned back towards Jake and asked him again, "What's going on? Why am I here?" "I'm not sure," he replied hesitantly, "but my son is in danger." Sarah knew that this was a serious situation, but she also couldn't help feeling like there were too many unanswered questions and too much to uncover. With renewed determination, Detective Sarah led Jake through the park, following his lead as they searched for any signs of evidence or witnesses to the kidnapping. They scoured the playground, examining every nook and cranny, looking for anything that might have been left behind or clues about who was involved in this twisted game. As they continued their search, They stumbled upon a small laboratory hidden away from sight on the outskirts of town. The lab looked like a makeshift version of a science museum, complete with advanced equipment and strange objects scattered around the room. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that her investigation had led them to the location where Jake was being held captive. She knew that they would need to gather more information before they could take any action, but she also couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping over her. As they entered the lab and made their way through its dimly lit halls, Detective Sarah noticed something strange about one of the shelves on the wall. The shelf was covered in a thick layer of dust, but there were several small vials stacked against it. She carefully picked up one of the vials and examined it closely. "What are you looking at?" she asked Detective David, her voice shaking with curiosity as she opened the lid of the vial. "We're trying to analyze their voices," Detective David replied, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "We found some strange patterns in their recordings that match certain frequencies or tones." Sarah's heart leapt into her throat when she realized just what the pattern meant. The kidnapper was using the voices of the children he had captured as a means of controlling and manipulating them to carry out his experiments. She knew that they would need to take action before it was too late, but she also couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by someone who seemed determined to keep their secrets hidden. She turned back towards Jake and asked him again, "What's going on? Why am I here?" "I'm not sure," he replied hesitantly, "but my son is in danger." Sarah knew that this was a serious situation, but she also couldn't help feeling like there were too many unanswered questions and too much to uncover. With renewed determination, Detective Sarah led Jake through the park, following his lead as they searched for any signs of evidence or witnesses to the kidnapping. They scoured the playground, examining every nook and cranny, looking for anything that might have been left behind or clues about who was involved in this twisted game. As they continued their search, they stumbled upon a small laboratory hidden away from sight on the outskirts of town. The lab looked like a makeshift version of a science museum, complete with advanced equipment and strange objects scattered around the room. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that her investigation had led them to the location where Jake was being held captive. She knew that they would need to gather more information before they could take any action, but she also couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping over her. As they entered the lab and made their way through its dimly lit halls, Detective Sarah noticed something strange about one of the shelves on the wall. The shelf was covered in a thick layer of dust, but there were several small vials stacked against it. She carefully picked up one of the vials and examined it closely. "What are you looking at?" she asked Detective David, her voice shaking with curiosity as she opened the lid of the vial. "We're trying to analyze their voices," Detective David replied, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "We found some strange patterns in their recordings that match certain frequencies or tones." Sarah's heart leapt into her throat when she realized just what the pattern meant. The kidnapper was using the voices of the children he had captured as a means of controlling and manipulating them to carry out his experiments. She knew that they would need to take action before it was too late, but she also couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by someone who seemed determined to keep their secrets hidden. She turned back towards Jake and asked him again, "What's going on? Why am I here?" "I'm not sure," he replied hesitantly, "but my son is in danger." Sarah knew that this was a serious situation, but she also couldn't help feeling like there were too many unanswered questions and too much to uncover. With renewed determination, Detective Sarah led Jake through the park, following his lead as they searched for any signs of evidence or witnesses to the kidnapping. They scoured the playground, examining every nook and cranny, looking for anything that might have been left behind or clues about who was involved in this twisted game. As they continued their search, they stumbled upon a small laboratory hidden away from sight on the outskirts of town. The lab looked like a makeshift version of a science museum, complete with advanced equipment and strange objects scattered around the room. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that her investigation had led them to the location where Jake was being held captive. She knew that they would need to gather more information before they could take any action, but she also couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping over her. As they entered the lab and made their way through its dimly lit halls, Detective Sarah noticed something strange about one of the shelves on the wall. The shelf was covered in a thick layer of dust, but there were several small vials stacked against it. She carefully picked up one of the vials and examined it closely. "What are you looking at?" she asked Detective David, her voice shaking with curiosity as she opened Global Outline. A Black Father's Park day with his 7-year-old son turns into a nightmare when a white woman accuses him of kidnapping and cops handcuff him in front of his child. As they continued their search, they stumbled upon a small laboratory hidden away from sight on the outskirts of town. The lab looked like a makeshift version of a science museum, complete with advanced equipment and strange objects scattered around the room. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that her investigation had led them to the location where Jake was being held captive. She knew that they would need to gather more information before they could take any action, but she also couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping over her. As they entered the lab and made their way through its dimly lit halls, Detective Sarah noticed something strange about one of the shelves on the wall. The shelf was covered in a thick layer of dust, but there were several small vials stacked against it. "What are you looking at?" she asked Detective David, her voice shaking with curiosity as she opened up the vial and examined its contents. Inside was a small flask filled with a liquid that shimmered like an opal. Sarah's eyes widened in shock as she realized what the flask contained, a rare crystal of pure silver. "This is incredible," Detective David said, his hand shaking slightly as he pulled out a few vials and inspected them further. "It appears to contain some sort of healing or defensive properties that could potentially save Jake's life." Sarah felt her heart race with excitement at the potential rescue opportunity, but also fear for her own safety. She had stumbled upon something dangerous, and she didn't know if they were alone in this laboratory or if someone else was already investigating. As they continued their search, they encountered several obstacles that threatened to prevent them from reaching Jake's captors. The lab contained a complex system of traps and alarms, each designed to keep the inmates locked up at all times. Sarah had to work quickly and strategically to disable these systems while avoiding detection by the cops. They discovered a hidden room in one of the laboratories that seemed to be connected directly to the main chamber. As they entered the room, they heard heavy footsteps approaching from behind them. Before they could react, Jake's captors appeared before them, their faces twisted and expressions filled with fear and desperation. "We're here," Detective David said firmly, his voice ringing out in a determined tone. "What is going on?" The white woman glared at him, her eyes narrowing as she revealed that she had been investigating Jake's case for months, ever since he went missing. She accused Sarah and the Black family of kidnapping her son and framing them with false charges. Sarah tried to maintain a calm demeanor in front of the captors, but inside, she was trembling with fear. The revelation came as a shock, not only because it revealed the extent of their involvement in Jake's disappearance, but also because they had been using him for their own nefarious purposes all along. "We didn't kidnap your son," Sarah said firmly, her voice rising above the captors' protests. "Our intentions were purely to find and protect him." The white woman sneered at her her eyes narrowing even further as she revealed that Jake had been taken captive by a powerful gang led by one of their members who had hired them to kidnap his son in exchange for millions of dollars. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the full scope of the situation. They were dealing with not only dangerous criminals, but also powerful individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their own interests, even if it meant using violence and deception to achieve their goals. We need your help, Detective David said firmly, his voice rising again in a desperate plea for them to stop this deadly game. Your son is not safe, and we cannot risk him becoming another victim. The white woman glared at him once more before turning our attention back to Jake's captors. She refused to let go of the possibility that he was still alive or that they had been wrong in their accusations. As Sarah stood there, overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation and the danger facing them all, she knew that they were going to have to use every resource at her disposal to save Jake's life. The chase would continue for days and even weeks as Detective David and his team worked tirelessly behind the scenes to gather evidence, identify potential suspects, and unravel the web of lies and deceit that had led them here. In the end, their perseverance paid off, and they were able to rescue Jake from the clutches of his captors. Sarah felt a surge of relief wash over her as she watched him being taken away by Detective David, his face shining with determination and gratitude for having been saved. We did it, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Thank you so much, everyone. The white woman glared at them once more before turning around to leave the laboratory, determined not to let this nightmare come back to haunt her or anyone else again. As she disappeared into the darkness of the night, Detective David and his team knew that they had made a difference in the lives of two families who had been forever changed by their actions. The chase would continue for weeks and even months, as Sarah and Detective David worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring justice to Jake's captors and put an end to the dangerous game they had played. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew that they were doing everything in their power to protect not only one child, but also a whole community from harm. As the sun began to rise over the small town of Millfield, Detective David looked out at the landscape with pride and satisfaction, knowing that justice had been served. He vowed to continue fighting for what was right, no matter how difficult or dangerous it may be, so as to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. And with that, he turned his back on the laboratory and made his way towards home, determined to make sure that Jake's life would remain safe and secure in the years to come. In the small town of Millfield, a peaceful day turned into a nightmare when a Black Dad's Park day with his 7-year-old son was hijacked by a white woman who accused him of kidnapping, and cops handcuffed him in front of their child. As Sarah and Detective David watched helplessly as Jake's captors made off with the family's precious belongings, they couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. The chase would continue for weeks and even months, as Sarah and Detective David worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring justice to Jake's captors and put an end to the dangerous game they had played. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew that they were doing everything in their power to protect not only one child, but also a whole community from harm. Sarah was determined to catch her husband's attackers before they could escape into the unknown. She called up the Millfield Police Department and arranged for an evidence search, searching through Jake's belongings at every stop, hoping that she might find any leads or clues that would help them bring his captors to justice. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah spent countless hours poring over photos, documents, and other materials collected by her team. They had pieced together a timeline of events leading up to Jake's abduction, tracing him from a local park where he was playing with friends to an abandoned warehouse on a dark night when he was picked up. Despite the odds stacked against them, Sarah refused to give up hope. She knew that justice needed to be served and that Jake's captors were responsible for his safety. With each passing day, she grew more determined to bring them down one by one. As the case went back and forth between the police department and a team of private investigators, Sarah began to piece together the motivations behind the white woman's accusations against her husband. She discovered that Jake had been dating a local black woman who was jealous of his success in business and saw him as competition for opportunities. The couple had started fighting over Jake's financial stability and his decision to pursue a career in music. With these new pieces of information, Sarah realized that the white woman's accusations were not just about kidnapping, but also about Revan. She knew that if she could uncover the truth behind her husband's actions, it would be the key to bringing him down from this dangerous situation once and for all. As Detective David worked tirelessly on the case, he became increasingly frustrated with the lack of leads they had found so far. He began to question his own instincts and whether Jake was really in danger or if she was just playing mind games with her husband's captors. But Sarah refused to give up hope. She knew that justice needed to be served no matter how difficult it may seem, and that Detective David was the only person who could help them bring down the white woman's accusers. With his unwavering determination and years of experience on this case, he felt like he had a shot at solving the mystery. As they delved deeper into the case, Sarah discovered that the white woman's accusations were not just about Jake, but also about her own insecurities and fears. She was jealous of Jake's success in business and saw him as competition for opportunities, which led to them turning on each other. With this newfound knowledge, Detective David realized that he needed to take a more empathetic approach when dealing with the white woman's accusations. He began to understand her perspective and tried to put himself in her shoes. He listened to her stories, trying to uncover the root cause of their conflict, rather than simply punishing Jake for his mistakes. As they continued their investigation, Sarah found herself opening up to Detective David about her own struggles with jealousy and insecurity. With this newfound understanding, Detective David was able to empathize more with the white woman's accusations against Jake and see them as not just a case of mistaken identity, but also an opportunity for healing. He realized that by taking the time to understand their perspective, he could approach the situation from a different angle and potentially reach a resolution that didn't involve punishment. As they worked together, Sarah and Detective David continued to gather evidence and build a solid case against the white woman's accusers. They discovered that she had been involved in several other illegal activities over the past few years, including drug trafficking and money laundering, which made her a prime suspect for Jake's abduction. With these new leads, they began to focus their attention on the white woman's former associates and the people who were helping her cover up her actions. They discovered that she had hired several individuals with connections in law enforcement agencies to help her evade capture, including high-ranking officials from both the local police department and a federal agency. With this newfound information, Sarah realized that they needed to take a more direct approach to apprehending the white woman's former associates. She began to gather evidence against them and worked tirelessly behind the scenes to coordinate their efforts with law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions. As the case progressed, Sarah and Detective David faced numerous challenges along the way. They had to navigate through complex legal procedures and political interference, all while keeping up their relentless pursuit of justice for Jake's captors. But despite these obstacles, they remained steadfast in their mission to bring the white woman's accusers to justice. In a dramatic turn of events, Sarah and Detective David finally uncovered the truth behind the white woman's accusations against her husband. They discovered that she had been involved in a scheme to embezzle money from Jake's company, which led to his abduction as a form of revenge for their failed relationship. With this newfound information, they were able to arrest the white woman and charge her with several counts of fraud and embezzlement. The trial was held in court, where Sarah stood by her husband's side, tears streaming down her face as she watched the verdict being read out loud. As the jury deliberated on the charges against the white woman, Detective David shared his thoughts with the judge and the prosecution team. He emphasized that justice needed to be served not just for Jake's captors, but also for the victims of their crimes and the community they had come from. With this message in mind, the judge imposed a life sentence on the white woman, ordering her to serve out her remaining years behind bars while she was considered an enemy of law. The prosecution team filed paperwork with the court to appeal her sentence, but Sarah refused to let go of her husband's side and remained by his side throughout the entire process. As they stood in front of a crowd of cheering supporters and family members, Detective David shared a moment of reflection with Sarah as he took out the verdict readout. He looked at her face, tears streaming down her own eyes, and said that it was not an easy decision to make, but one that had been necessary for justice to be served. Despite the challenges they faced along the way, Sarah knew that she could never have done it without Detective David's unwavering support and dedication. He had risked everything he had to bring down the white woman's accusers, even putting himself in danger at times, and he had succeeded. With this newfound understanding of their mission, Sarah and Detective David vowed to continue fighting for justice for all who have been victims of crime and inequality. They knew that it would not be an easy road, but one filled with hope, determination, and the unwavering belief that they could make a difference in their community. And as they looked out at the bright sun shining over Millfield on this fateful day, Sarah knew that justice had been served once again for her husband's captors, the victims of crime, and all those who lived through it with fear and uncertainty. Global outline. A Black Father's Park day with his 7-year-old son turns into a nightmare when a white woman accuses him of kidnapping and cops handcuff him in front of his child. At the beginning, on a sunny morning in Millfield, a family was enjoying their peaceful picnic at the local park. The dad, David, had been spending time with his 7-year-old son, Michael, exploring the green grass and admiring the colorful flowers, when he noticed something strange happening around them. As they were about to continue eating their sandwiches, an older woman approached them from a distance. She was wearing a white blouse and jeans, carrying a bag full of evidence for a crime report. Her face was stern yet empathetic as she spoke with David in broken English. "Detective," Sarah said, her voice calm but determined, "I need your help regarding this case. My husband, Michael, has been accused of kidnapping a young girl from the park." David looked at Sarah with concern and nodded his head in understanding. He knew that cases like these often involved complex evidence and multiple suspects, which could make it challenging for an officer to identify the right person quickly. "Are you sure he didn't happen here alone?" David asked, gesturing towards Michael's spot on the blanket where they were sitting. Sarah hesitated before answering him. "We believe that his younger sister, Lily, was walking with him when she disappeared. The girl has been missing for hours now." Detective David studied Sarah and her son carefully, taking notes on their physical appearance, clothing, and any distinguishing features. He then approached the older woman and asked if she had a description of the young girl's hair color or any specific details about where they were last seen. The woman, describing Lily with detail, but seemed to be hesitant when discussing her sister's disappearance. She mentioned that they had been out for an hour by the time Michael arrived back at their home and went straight to his bedroom without talking to anyone else. David continued asking more questions, hoping to gather enough information to identify Michael as a potential suspect. However, Sarah was still skeptical about him being involved in Lily's disappearance. She knew that children like Michael were often innocent until proven guilty, and could be accused of something they didn't do. Despite the doubt on her husband's part, Detective David remained persistent. He explained how the police had been conducting an investigation into a nearby crime scene, where Lily was last seen wearing red lipstick and carrying a backpack filled with items that matched the description given by Sarah's mother. David then turned to Michael, asking him about his whereabouts before he went back to their home on that fateful day. However, as they sat down for lunch at the park again, he became increasingly agitated and defensive when he denied having taken Lily away from the playground. "I swear," he insisted, "I was just playing with my sister there. We were running around and had a great time before she disappeared." Sarah felt uneasy about Michigan's sudden behavior, but Detective David continued to question him further. She asked if he could recall seeing anything suspicious or unusual that morning after his wife accused him of kidnapping Lily. Michael hesitated at first, but eventually broke down and revealed the events leading up to their son's capture by the police. He claimed that they had been playing with a group of children on a nearby swing set when one of them started arguing with him about who was taller than he was. When Michael tried to defend himself by saying, "I'm taller," the other child responded, "No, you're not. You're shorter," and then pointed out his own height in an aggressive manner. The argument escalated into a physical altercation, which led to David's wife accusing him of kidnapping her son. David knew that this was just one possible scenario for what happened on the day Lily disappeared, but he also believed there might be other clues or evidence linking Michael to the crime. As they sat down together again at the picnic table, Detective David and Sarah decided to gather more information about Michael's behavior leading up to his arrest. They asked him if he had ever been in a conflict with anyone before that day, such as an argument with Lily over who was taller or what happened when someone else tried to defend themselves. They also questioned whether he had any prior criminal history and if there were any incidents where he had displayed aggressive behavior towards children or strangers. Michael's answers seemed contradictory at first, but eventually revealed a pattern of violent acts that began months ago, leading him down the path of kidnapping Lily. He admitted that his anger towards Lily's taller height led him to attack her and then turned on his wife for accusing him. Sarah felt relieved when she heard this information and knew that David had done everything he could to protect their son from any harm. She understood that Michael might have been feeling overwhelmed or angry at the time, but it was clear that he was capable of violence if necessary. Detective David nodded in agreement as they discussed how the police would now proceed with the investigation. They would need more evidence and witnesses to connect Michael's actions on the day Lily disappeared to the crime committed earlier, including any other incidents where he had displayed aggressive behavior towards children or strangers. As they sat down for a final dinner together at the park before heading home, Sarah felt grateful for the detective's unwavering support in bringing down the white woman's accusers and ensuring justice was served. She knew that there would be challenges ahead, but she also believed that with determination and perseverance, they could make a difference in their community. For Michael himself, he understood why his parents were so dedicated to fighting for what is right. He had grown up seeing firsthand the harsh realities of crime and inequality, which led him to question society's assumptions about who should be held accountable for certain actions. But as he sat with Sarah and Detective David at the picnic table once again that day, he knew that justice was within reach if only they could continue working together towards a brighter future. As the sun began to set on Michael's park day with his 7-year-old son, Lily, and Sarah stood at a picnic table enjoying their delicious dinner. They had been celebrating for hours, chatting about life in a small town and sharing stories from their childhoods together. The air was warm, and the sounds of laughter and conversations filled the surrounding trees. Suddenly, Michael's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He picked it up to answer, but his heart raced as he heard Lily's voice on the other end. "Dad, "It's Sarah," she said, her eyes wide in excitement. Michael froze for a moment before responding. "Sarah? What happened?" Lily explained that she had just finished playing with her friend at the park and saw an older woman sitting next to them. She was wearing a bright pink hat and carrying something over her shoulder like it weighed a ton. As they approached each other, Lily noticed a man standing nearby who seemed nervous. "Hi there," Sarah said, approaching the stranger. "I'm Detective David." The old woman looked up from her phone with surprise before speaking. "Detective? I don't know you, but my son was playing in your park earlier and he disappeared without a trace. We were all worried. Sick when we realized that it could be someone like him who had taken him." Michael's heart sank as he remembered the look on Lily's face just moments before her disappearance. He knew what Sarah meant, the fear, confusion, and panic she must have felt in that moment. Sarah immediately stepped forward to offer assistance. "We're doing everything we can," she said. "Are you sure this man is your son?" The old woman hesitated for a minute before replying with hesitation, but eventually nodded yes. Sarah then walked over to the stranger, taking his hand and speaking softly in a calm voice. "Is there anything you were worried about, or did he have any injuries that we should be aware of?" she asked. The man looked at her for a moment before hesitantly answering. "He was just sitting nearby when I noticed him disappear. He had been running around, playing with the other kids in the park." Sarah nodded understandingly as she took note of his description. "Are there any witnesses or CCTV footage we can review?" The man shook his head, looking a little embarrassed. "I don't have access to it right now," he said, "but I would be happy to see if anyone saw anything suspicious around the park that could help us identify him." Sarah agreed and asked for Sarah's phone number so they could call her later for more information. The man handed over his phone, and she quickly dialed Detective David's number. Detective David listened intently as Lily explained their situation before asking a few questions of her own. "How old is your son? Did he have any injuries that you noticed?" Lily hesitated slightly, but then nodded yes to both questions. "Can you describe him in detail?" Sarah asked, watching closely as the man took notes on his appearance and behavior. The man began to describe Michael's short stature, a muscular build with dark hair, blue eyes, and a friendly smile. He also mentioned that he was wearing bright pink shorts and a white t-shirt with the word adventure written on it. Detective David nodded in understanding as they continued their conversation. They knew from Lily's description that this man had been playing alone for most of the day before his disappearance, so they focused their attention on any other potential suspects who may have interacted with him at the park earlier or during the evening hours. As the sun began to set, and they prepared to leave the picnic area, Sarah suggested taking a short walk through the nearby woods to search for any leads. They both agreed that it would be safer than leaving Lily alone in her car while they searched for more information. The trail led them deeper into the forest, where the air was crisp and cool. As they walked along the winding paths, they encountered several other families with children playing in the nearby park. Some of these parents had noticed something strange about Michael's behavior on that day. He seemed to be acting suspiciously towards some kids who were running around and chasing after him. One woman stood at a picnic table next to her daughter, watching as Michael played with another child before disappearing into the woods. She quickly alerted Detective David, pointing out the children's clothing and noting their size and height. Sarah nodded in agreement and followed the lead they'd taken earlier. They searched through the park for any further evidence of Michael's whereabouts or behavior, but found no additional leads. As darkness began to fall over the forest, Sarah suggested heading back to the picnic area to make a phone call and ask Lily if she could describe him again more closely in detail so that they could get a better understanding of his appearance and clothing. She grabbed her phone and made the call while Detective David followed close behind them. "Hi there," Lily said over the receiver, trying to keep her voice steady even with the distance between them. Detective David listened intently as she described Michael's short stature, muscular build with dark hair, blue eyes, a friendly smile, and clothing that was bright pink shorts and white t-shirt with the word adventure written on it. She also mentioned his behavior. He seemed to be acting suspiciously towards some kids who were running around and chasing him. Sarah nodded in understanding as they continued their conversation. They knew from Lily's description that this man had been playing alone for most of the day before his disappearance, so they focused their attention on NEOT. Her potential suspects who may have interacted with him at the park earlier or during the evening hours. As darkness began to fall over the forest, Sarah suggested heading back to the picnic area to make a phone call and ask Lily if she could describe him again more closely in detail so that they could get a better understanding of his appearance and clothing. She grabbed her phone and made the call while Detective David followed close behind them. "Hi there," Lily said over the receiver, trying to keep her voice steady even with the distance between them. "I remember he was about your son's height, right? And he had that bright pink shirt on." Detective David nodded in understanding as they listened intently. "Yes, you're correct. He also seemed a little bit fidgety and restless throughout his playtime. I think it might have been because he was feeling overwhelmed or anxious." Lily's eyes widened with disbelief at the details she had described. She couldn't believe that this man could be her son by accident. Detective David leaned in, taking note of Lily's concerns. "We'll need to run some tests on him and his clothing to see if there are any clues we can find about what he was wearing or where it might have been when he disappeared." Sarah nodded agreement, feeling grateful for Detective David's expertise and dedication. They knew that they couldn't do this alone, but with the help of a dedicated detective like himself, they had hope of making some progress towards finding Lily's whereabouts. As they walked back to their car, Sarah turned to Michael, who was sitting quietly in the passenger seat, looking thoughtful. "Are you okay?" she asked him softly. "You seemed upset earlier when I called." Michael sighed deeply before answering, his eyes watering at the memory of his disappearance and the fear he had felt that day. "I know what you're thinking," he said, "but it's not my fault. Lily was running around with her friends all day, and she couldn't remember where they were or when she last saw me." Sarah put a hand on his shoulder in support, knowing how hard Michael must have been to handle the situation. "You can do this," she whispered. "We'll find Lily together. We just need to stay focused and persistent, because there's more than one person out there who could be responsible for what happened that day." Michael nodded in agreement, his eyes lighting up with determination. "Thank you, Sarah," he said. "I promise we will do everything we can to bring this case to justice." A Black Father's Park day with his 7-year-old son turned into a nightmare when a white woman accused him of kidnapping and cops handcuffed him in front of their child. The world was on lockdown that day, as authorities searched for Lily, the young girl who had vanished without a trace from her home in the picturesque town of Millfield. The dad, Michael, stood outside his parked car with his son by his side, trying to come to terms with what had happened. He couldn't believe that his daughter was gone, and everyone seemed so focused on finding her. They walked back to their car, still shaken from the incident, but determined not to give up. As they drove home, Sarah sat in the passenger seat, deep in thought. She remembered Lily's playful energy as she played with friends all day, running around outside, laughing and chasing after butterflies. But now everything seemed strange. Where was her friend? What had happened that night? Michael took a deep breath before asking his wife, "Do you remember anything about the time we were driving home from school?" Sarah looked back at him, sensing something was off. "Did Lily ever mention going to a park on our way there, or after getting home?" she asked. Michael nodded and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to recall the details of that day's events. She opened her eyes and saw a young woman walking towards their car with a sense of urgency in her steps. The man behind the wheel looked up as if he had heard something, but he couldn't quite make out what she was saying or where she was heading. Before he could react, Lily appeared out of nowhere, sprinting towards them. The girl's eyes were wide and scared, and when she saw Michael's shocked expression, her face softened into a smile. "Oh my goodness," she said, holding him tightly in her arms. "I can't believe you're here." "I was just trying to find Lily," Michael replied, his voice shaking slightly from the fear that had gripped them all. "She disappeared without warning, and I don't know where she could be." He turned to Sarah with a worried look. Sarah took a deep breath before speaking, her eyes scanning the surrounding area for any signs of Lily's friends or family members. She looked back at Michael, sensing his worry and determination in his eyes. "We need to find out more about this woman," she said softly. As they drove through the town, Sarah couldn't help but notice that everyone seemed uneasy around her. The police officers who had arrived on the scene were tight-lipped about their investigation, and Lily's disappearance had sent shockwaves through the community. Some residents whispered rumors of a dark secret involving Lily or someone with access to her parents' home. Sarah tried not to let these doubts consume her as they continued their search for Lily. She knew that finding her would be a daunting task, but she refused to give up hope. As they drove deeper into town, they came across the park where Lily had last seen them. The air was thick with the scent of pine trees and blooming wildflowers. The sun was setting behind the distant hills, casting an orange glow over the peaceful scene. Sarah parked their car in a quiet spot away from the hustle and bustle of the visitors, and they began to search for Lily's friends. They searched through the park, asking anyone who had seen or heard anything about Lily on that day if she was there. They spoke with children playing nearby, parents chatting at picnic tables, and elderly residents browsing in a small store. But no one seemed familiar enough to link their disappearance back to Lily. As they left the park, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She knew that something wasn't right about this case, but she was determined to find out what it was before it was too late. The next day, Sarah and Michael retraced their steps through town, trying different routes and asking anyone who might have seen Lily on her last visit. They searched high schools, libraries, parks, even the local police station, hoping for any leads or clues that could help them solve the case. Finally, after several days of searching, they received a call from Sarah's childhood friend, Emily, who had heard about Lily's disappearance through an old neighbor. Emily lived in Millfield and was shocked to learn that her best friend had been missing all this time. Sarah and Michael rushed over to Emily's house, where she told them the details of what had happened at the park on their last visit. They remembered everything with vivid detail, from the woman's quick escape through a broken window to the chaos that followed when they arrived at Lily's home. Emily said that Lily had been playing in her backyard when she disappeared without a trace. She never mentioned going anywhere else or seeing anyone near her before disappearing. The police officers who had searched for her were not able to find any evidence of a forced entry into her house, and it seemed like someone had broken in through an unlocked window. Sarah and Michael sat down with Emily, trying to piece together what they knew so far about Lily's disappearance. They talked about the park, their plans that day, and the strange behavior of the woman who had called them on their way home from school. Emily told them that she remembered seeing a man walking towards her friend when they arrived at the park earlier in the afternoon. She said he was wearing dark clothes, tall with short hair, and carrying something in his hands. Emily tried to describe him, but she couldn't remember any distinguishing features or details about him. Sarah and Michael searched the nearby area for anyone who had seen this man that day and found no matches. They also spoke with Lily's parents, who were devastated by their daughter's disappearance and didn't know what had happened. As they continued to investigate, Sarah and Michael discovered a hidden room in Lily's house that contained her stolen laptop computer and some personal belongings. The police officers confirmed that the man who was seen near Lily on the day of her disappearance was indeed the thief. Sarah and Michael were shocked by this revelation and immediately arrested him for theft. He had broken into Lily's home, stole her laptop, and returned to his hiding spot in the park later that night. It turned out that he had been working at a nearby factory all afternoon when he saw Lily playing there, convinced she was going outside. Sarah and Mika were relieved to finally have their daughter back safe and sound, but they couldn't shake off the feeling of unease about what could happen next. They knew that the case would need more time and resources to fully investigate, and they vowed to keep searching for any leads or clues that might help them find Lily's parents. As they drove home from Millfield that night, Sarah hugged Michael tightly, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe how lucky she had been to have found their daughter so quickly, but the darkness of the case still haunted her. They promised each other that they would do everything in their power to bring this man's actions to justice and find Lily's parents before it was too late. The end. In the dimly lit darkness of a secluded park, a black father's routine day turned into an eerie nightmare. As he and his 7-year-old son made their way through the lush greenery, they were unaware that someone was watching them from behind. The sun had just set, casting a warm glow on everything around them, but there was something sinister lurking in the shadows. The park's resident security guard, Jack, noticed them as he patrolled the area earlier that evening and decided to investigate further. He approached their father with caution, trying to blend into his surroundings without drawing attention too easily. The father tried to maintain a calm demeanor, explaining that they had been lost for hours after Lily left her home. Jack listened carefully, weighing his words carefully before speaking again. "I have reason to believe you've taken your daughter and may be attempting to flee the scene," he said with a firm conviction in his voice. The father's heart raced as he realized what Jack was saying. He had been working at a nearby factory all afternoon when he spotted Lily playing on a swing set in the park. The sight of her safely enjoying herself made him feel safe, but it also raised some questions about why someone would want to kidnap their daughter. Jack's instincts kicked into gear and led him closer to investigate. He approached them with an accusatory tone as they continued walking through the park. "Is this your child?" he demanded, his voice shaking slightly. The father looked up at Jack, feeling a wave of panic wash over him. "Yes," he replied weakly, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know what to do." Jack's heart sank as he realized that Lily had been taken by someone unknown and could be in danger. He knew they needed the police immediately to get her back safely. As the father made a phone call to report their situation, Jack continued with his investigation. He followed up on leads and conducted interviews at local businesses, searching for any potential witnesses or suspects who might have seen Lily earlier that evening. The more he dug into the case, the clearer it became that something sinister was taking place in this park. The father's reputation as a responsible parent had taken a hit, and his family's safety seemed to be compromised by an unknown force with intentions of harming their child. It wasn't long before Jack received a call from a police officer named Detective Jameson. He arrived at the scene just moments after the father did, looking determined to bring the perpetrator to justice. Detective Jameson immediately launched into questioning the father and his son about what had happened that night. They were cooperative, providing detailed information about their whereabouts when they left Lily's home and their activities in the park. As Detective Jameson began piecing together the details of the case, he discovered a pattern emerging. The perpetrator was known to work at a local factory during off hours, specifically around the hours of 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. He had been targeting young children who were playing on swings or climbing trees near the park's edge. Detective Jameson knew that they needed more time and resources to gather evidence against the suspect before making any charges, but he was determined not to rest until justice was served for Lily and her family. He gathered information about the factory where the perpetrator worked, including employee records and security footage of the area during his shifts. He also spoke with witnesses who had seen him leaving the park earlier in the evening that day, providing details about what he looked like and how he appeared to be acting suspiciously. With these pieces of evidence, Detective Jameson began constructing a case against the suspect, presenting it to the court as a serious threat to Lily's safety. The father was arrested for theft and kidnapping, and his trial would soon begin in court. In that dark night at the park, a Black Father's Day turned into a nightmare when he found himself accused of something far more sinister than just stealing from someone's home. But through determination and perseverance, justice was served, bringing an end to this case and ensuring Lily's safety for years to come. As Detective Jameson stood trial for his arrest in the park, Lily's father couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and excitement. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with multiple witnesses stating that he had stolen from the factory where she worked during her shift earlier that night.